Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Alnita Jackson, and my colleague Dr. Angela Stewart and I are both assistant professors at Fayetteville State University in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And today we will share some information on how to inform family and friends that through the performance of your duties as a nurse that you've exposed them to COVID-19. The purpose of this presentation is to share information that may be useful in practice in our personal lives as it relates to the pandemic. So these are some of the takeaways from today's presentation that I hope you will be able to pull out of your toolbox when you need it. These are the objectives that will be covered throughout the presentation. Everyone in the world has been affected in some way by the pandemic. Therefore, we have to be prepared to tackle the issues surrounding COVID-19 in order to have a candid discussion regarding the novel coronavirus. As healthcare professionals and simply as human beings, we have to ask the hard questions and must be prepared to act compassionately, ethically, and legally. So these are the big questions. What are the barriers or stigmas may hinder disclosure to COVID-19 exposure? What are your ethical and legal obligations to disclose? And how do you tell your family and friends when you have exposed them to the coronavirus? Telling family and friends when you've exposed them to COVID-19 can be extremely difficult. You will encounter barriers that may prohibit your ability to actually say those words that I've exposed you to COVID-19. However, I do believe that most people want to do the right thing, especially if they work in a profession of service such as nursing. With that assumption in mind, why do we hesitate to talk to colleagues, families, or friends when we've been exposed to COVID-19? The pictures answer that question. We're afraid of the response that we may receive. Yes, the person may be shocked, devastated, or simply furious, like this guy. I believe that the response from this guy is the one we fear the most and hinders our ability to say those three dreaded words, I have COVID. In this case study, a 13-year-old reports to school for standardized testing, and during that 3-day period, she gets exposed to COVID. This really isn't a case scenario. This is actually what happened to me. My daughter that I had kept protected as much as I could, within 3 days of returning to school, she was exposed to COVID. So now that meant I was exposed and my oldest daughter was also exposed. So that meant we all had to go to the clinic to be tested. So I am Mrs. James in this case scenario. So based on the information that's presented here, what should be Mrs. James's next steps? First, we have the option of quarantining and monitoring for signs and symptoms for 10 days without testing. We have the option to do nothing since it was an indirect exposure. We have the option that all the people in the James family, that whoever they were in contact with, should be notified. And then we have option D, that after 7 days and receiving a negative test result, we may discontinue quarantine. So out of all of these options, the only incorrect choice would be to do nothing. Everything else that's presented here would be an appropriate response to an exposure. Based on the information that we've talked about in this presentation so far, when we expose others to COVID-19, should we disclose that information? And the answer to that question is absolutely we should. And the reason we need to disclose is because it's the right thing to do, it's the legal thing to do, and it protects all of us because we're all in this together. Got this.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. So far, we have uncovered some information concerning the reasons and the importance of disclosing the information, and also some of the barriers to disclosing information. So right now, let's jump right into the actual conversation. It is important to tell your friends and family about your exposure as soon as possible. Phone calls are the best method. However, with the technology that we use today, such as Zoom, FaceTime, and Skype, are also very effective means of communication. Face-to-face communication is discouraged because of the increased risk of further exposure. Text and emails are acceptable, however, they may be misinterpreted. So the slide before you represents deaths by occupation. And it should be no surprise to anyone here today that healthcare workers have the highest percentages of deaths by occupation, with nurses leading with 32% of deaths due to COVID-19. Here you see deaths by ethnicity. Whites have the highest percentage at 36%, and Native Americans have the lowest percentage of deaths due to COVID-19 at 2%. When talking to family and friends about your exposure, it is important to be open and honest. Choose your words carefully and be compassionate and empathetic. Remember, there is no shame and no blame when having these conversations. So when delivering the news and having these conversations, first you want to gather your thoughts. Have a general idea of what you want to say. Then you want to find a quiet place, somewhere where you can have a conversation without any disturbances or disruptions. Do not use medical jargon. Choose simple terms that are easily understood by lay people. You want to be empathetic. You want to give the person time to reflect on the news that you just shared with them and give them time to ask any questions that they may have. Here are two examples of what you could say and how to say it. For instance, I tested positive for COVID-19. I care about your health and well-being, and I think that you should get tested. Or you might try, I don't know if I gave it to you, but I do care about you, and I want to make sure that you are aware of this so that you can take action to protect yourself. So again, as you can see in these two examples, you should be short and void of medical jargon. Use empathy, compassion, and be transparent. In life, we know that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. When having these conversations with your family member and friends, you will more than likely feel extremely nervous. It's also natural to feel afraid and even uncomfortable having this difficult conversation. But remember, it is necessary. Both you and your loved one may feel emotional when you're sharing this information. And it's probably natural for you to even think about avoiding the conversation altogether. But remember, it is your responsibility to have this conversation with your loved ones so that they may be tested and protect themselves against this horrible disease. At this time, Dr. Jackson and I would like to thank you for your time and attention, and we will be happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.